The alternating cable cast-on is a variation of the cable cast-on. It's a variation you use when your project starts with ribbing. There's a link below this video for my cable cast-on tutorial, and if you are unfamiliar with it, I encourage you to check it out as it will have some tips in it that we won't cover in this more advanced video. So this is a little swatch I knit up to show you what the edge looks like. This is the cast-on edge, and it just kind of rolls nicely from one side to the edge. It's a nice, straight, kind of seamless edge. Now to do this cast-on, you use your knitting needles, and you start with slip knot. And I will demonstrate this first Continental style, then I'll switch to English style. So in the slip knot, we are going to knit a stitch, and then transfer that stitch back to the left needle by taking the left needle under the stitch and up through it, and then just pulling the right needle out. Now since that stitch was a knit stitch and this cast-on is done for ribbing, 1 by 1 ribbing, that means your slip knot is technically a purl stitch. So we have a purl, a knit, and our next stitch needs to be a purl. So we bring the yarn forward and insert the needle from the back to the front. Now this is a little bit different from the way we did it in the slip knot. For the cable cast-on, you do the slip knot like I just showed you, and then for the rest of them, you're going to do it this way. Instead of inserting the needle into the stitch like you normally would to knit or purl, we are going to go between the top 2 stitches. So see how my needle is under that stitch between the top 2 stitches, and then we purl into that space. Bring the left needle down and pick up that new stitch from the front. Now we bring the yarn to the back because we're doing ribbing. Remember, we need to do a knit stitch next. So again, the needle goes in between the top 2 stitches, right, like that, underneath the top stitch, and we knit into it. Whoops. And we knit into it. I'll show it one more time, Continental style, and then I'll switch to English. Bring the yarn forward for a purl stitch, in between the top 2 stitches. Bring the yarn around to purl. Then your left needle goes under the stitch in the front and slide it off your right needle onto the left. Then bring the yarn in back to do the knit stitch in between the top 2 stitches. Knit and slide the stitch onto the left needle. Now, English style is exactly the same. It just looks a little bit different because you're holding your yarn in your right hand. So that was a knit stitch. So now we purl. So the yarn has to be in front of our working needle. Put it in from back to front underneath the top stitch. Then wrap your yarn to purl. Now that new stitch on the right needle, you bring your left needle down in the front and into the stitch and slide your right needle out. Now the yarn goes in back for a knit stitch. We're going to, so it's behind my needle. Insert the needle underneath that top stitch. Then wrap the yarn to knit. Finish the knit stitch. Bring the left needle around the front and under. Slide the stitch onto the left needle. One more time. Insert the needle from the back to the front for the purl stitch underneath that top stitch. Then wrap your yarn to purl. Finish the purl stitch. Bring the left needle under the stitch and slide it over to the left needle. Now, a lot of videos will tell you to tighten the stitch at this point. And you can do that, but I encourage you don't pull it too tight because it will be really hard to get your needle in here for the next stitch if you pull it too tight. So for the knit stitch, the yarn is behind the working needle. Insert it, the needle as if to knit between the top 2 stitches. Bring the yarn around to knit. Now you have the new stitch on your right needle. Bring your left needle around the front and under it to pick it up. And this is what the cast-on looks like. So it looks a little bit sloppy right now, but that's okay, that's normal. And you can see that there are stitches that kind of recede. I'm not sure how much it shows up on the video, but that one kind of sits back from the two that are next to it. These two are knit stitches. That one that's kind of sitting back is a purl. That one's a purl. See, it's not always so evident, but a lot of times you'll be able to see it when you do this cast on yourself, that some of the stitches just kind of sit back from the other ones. And the ones that have this little diagonal, sometimes you can see the complete V. There's like a V here. That's the knit. This one's the purl. But I will tell you that when you are doing this yourself, it's really hard to see that sometimes. So one way to identify the stitches is to look at the last stitch you cast on, which is also oftentimes how you where you need to identify them, because you may have forgotten whether you've knit or purled the last stitch. So this stitch that I've just casted on is a knit stitch, and I can tell that because the yarn is coming out from the back of the stitch. See how it's behind these little bumps here? That's a knit stitch, which means my next stitch is going to be a purl. So I'll bring the yarn forward, insert the needle between the top two stitches and purl, then transfer that stitch back to the left needle. Now a purl stitch has the yarn coming out of the front. Do you see how it's coming out over, see that little bump there? It's coming out over top of that bump, and it also looks like it has two stitches above it. So when you see that, you know the next stitch you have to knit will be a knit stitch, because you've just completed a purl stitch. Now, when you start to knit your first row, you do have to make sure you do it in the same order. So remember, this is purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. I ended with a purl. So I have to start, if I'm knitting flat, I have to start knitting back with a purl stitch. So it'll be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. You want to keep those lined up so that you get this nice edge like I have on this sample. And one of the benefits of this is you can see how stretchy it is. It's a nice stretchy cast on, and it leaves that nice edge where the stitches just kind of roll over to the other side. Now this cast on can be modified for a 2x2 rib. So here I've cast it on, same thing I just did, but I did it before I started the video so that I would ensure that I would have no mistakes, because you know sometimes when I'm talking I make mistakes. Hopefully not as I'm giving instructions, but at any rate, I have this already casted on, and I've ended with a knit stitch. So to modify this for 2x2 ribbing, we have to move these stitches around. Now you would think that you could just cast on knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 for the cast on. And you could do that, but it's not going to give you that nice smooth edge. So this one is done with the method I'm going to show you. It has that nice smooth edge, nice and stretchy. You can see that's a 2x2 rib. This one, orange one, I cast it on knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. Now, it's pretty stretchy, and it's a fine cast on, but it doesn't have that nice neat edge like the pink one does. So that's the difference. And that's why for this alternating cable cast on, we do not do the knit 2, purl 2, knit 2 just to cast on. We are going to manipulate our stitches of the cast on so that they are in the knit 2, purl 2 order. So as I said, this first stitch here is a knit, and I can tell that because it's coming out from behind that little bump. So I am going to knit that stitch. Now this next one is a purl stitch, but for knit 2, purl 2, I need it to be a knit stitch. So that one's a purl, this one's a knit. We need to switch them. Now when you switch the stitches, you always want to make sure that you switch them so that the knit stitch crosses in front of the purl stitch, because you know how purls recede into the background and knits come to the foreground. We want that same thing here. So we want the knit stitch to be in front. So I'm going to insert my needle into the second stitch from the top, which is a knit stitch, and I'm going to do it in the front so that knit stitch comes to the front, and slide those stitches off. I'm pinching that loose stitch with my finger against my needle, going to put my left needle in it, put the other stitch back on, and now I've rearranged my cast on stitches so I have a knit and then a purl. So I'll knit this one. So now I have my knit 2, and now my next 2 stitches are purl stitches, because that's the one I switched, and this one's a purl in its natural place. And the next stitch is a knit stitch. So far I have knit 2, purl 2, and 1 knit. I need this next one to be a knit, but it's a purl stitch. And now the purl stitches do have kind of like a purl collar on them, like a purl stitch does in your regular knitting. And you can see here, this one kind of has the V like a knit stitch. This is what I was trying to show you earlier. It's not always real apparent, but hopefully as you become more comfortable doing this cast on, your stitches will become more consistent and you'll be able to see that more regularly. So I have a knit. My next stitch is a purl, but I need it to be a knit. So I'm going to do what I did earlier, insert the needle into the front of my knit stitch, which is the second one down, slide them off. I'm pinching that stitch that's going to be loose against my needle with my right hand so that I can just poke the needle right in there and put it back on. And now I have knit stitch. So now that's 2 knits I've done, and I have 2 purls in a row. And the next one's a knit. So I could knit that one and then do the switch again. But I want to show you something. So if you can do other patterns with this, like if you had a knit 2 purl 1, you could manipulate the stitches into that, or a purl knit 2 purl 1 or purl 2 knit 1. You can manipulate the stitches in that as well. Also, if your first stitch was a purl instead of a knit, it's going to be a little bit different. The same but different. The only thing different is that your first stitch here will be a knit that you have to switch, and your second stitch will be a purl. And remember I said you always want the knit stitches to be in front of the purl stitches. So if you come across this where your first stitch is a knit and your second stitch is a purl and you need to switch them around, you'll insert your needle into the back of the purl. It's the exact same thing, but instead of inserting your needle into the front like this, we're going to insert the needle into the back, squeeze that loose stitch with our thumb against the other needle, and we'll switch them this way because that keeps that knit stitch in the front. And then I would purl that one and knit this one, and then go on with whatever pattern I am doing. So that's how you manipulate the stitches for a knit 2 purl 2 or another variation of the knit 2 purl 2 or the knit 1, I'm sorry, the 2x2 ribbing or the 1x1 ribbing. You can manipulate your stitches around, as I did in this sample, to put them in the right order, and it will give you that nice edge like this sample here of my 2x2 ribbing.